For pilots in World War II, survival often came down to one thing: the machine beneath them. Some aircraft turned ordinary men into legends. Others sent entire crews to their deaths before they even saw the enemy. A few were so advanced they looked like they came from the future, and one aircraft changed aviation forever. Tonight, we were ranking the planes of World War II, from flying disasters to the machines that dominated the skies, and the jet fighter that arrived too late to save an empire already collapsing. Because these weren't just airplanes, they were weapons that decided who lived, who burned, and who won the war. Blackburn Botha, Britain entered the war desperate for aircraft that could patrol the seas, hunt submarines, and strike enemy ships before they reached the coastline. What it got instead was the Blackburn Botha. On paper, it sounded capable. Twin engines, multi-role design, a crew large enough to handle long patrol missions. But almost immediately, pilots realized something was horribly wrong. The aircraft was dangerously underpowered. Fully loaded, it struggled to climb. If one engine failed, crews often had seconds before the aircraft became uncontrollable. And engine failures weren't rare. Training crews feared the Botha so much that being assigned to one reportedly felt like a punishment. Visibility from the cockpit was terrible. Handling was unstable. Landing accidents became frighteningly common. The enemy barely needed to shoot these planes down. The aircraft was already doing the job itself. Within months, Britain quietly removed it from frontline combat. Not years, months. But the nightmare did end there, because even after being withdrawn, the Botha continued killing inexperienced trainees across Britain. It was remembered as a war-winning aircraft. It became remembered as a warning, and Britain wouldn't be the only country to discover how quickly a promising aircraft could become obsolete. Brewster Buffalo. At first glance, the Brewster Buffalo looked modern. Sleek fuselage, enclosed cockpit, retractable landing gear. In 1939, it genuinely appeared to be the future of fighter aviation. Some pilots even loved it. Finnish pilots flying Buffaloes against Soviet aircraft achieved shocking kill ratios during the Winter War. For a brief moment, the aircraft gained a reputation as a hidden gem. Then came the Pacific War, and suddenly, the Buffalo found itself facing Mitsubishi Zeros. Everything changed. The Japanese fighter was faster, lighter, more agile, and flown by combat veterans with years of experience. Allied pilots trying to turn against a Zero quickly discovered they were already dead. British squadrons defending Singapore described the Buffalo as sluggish and helpless during dogfights. Some pilots climbed into combat already convinced they weren't coming back. The aircraft had become too heavy after extra armor and equipment were added. What once felt competitive suddenly felt trapped in another era. And in aerial warfare, being just slightly worse can mean dying in seconds. But strangely enough, one of the most outdated aircraft of the entire war was about to become one of the most effective. Fairey Swordfish. By World War II standards, the Fairey Swordfish looked ridiculous. It was a biplane, fabric-covered wings, open cockpit, exposed struts. It looked less like a modern war machine, and more like something forgotten from the First World War. Enemy pilots mocked it, until they saw what it could do. In November 1940, Swordfish crews launched one of the most daring naval attacks in history against the Italian fleet at Taranto Harbor, flying low through darkness and anti-aircraft fire. These slow biplanes crippled multiple Italian battleships in a single night. The attack stunned naval strategists around the world. Japanese planners studied it carefully while preparing for Pearl Harbor. Then came the hunt for the Bismarck. One torpedo strike from a Swordfish jammed the battleship's rudder, sealing the fate of Germany's most feared warship. And the strangest part? Its slow speed sometimes worked in its favor. Some enemy defenses struggled to properly target it because the aircraft moved slower than expected. The Swordfish looked ancient, but somehow, it became legendary. Still, fear in the skies was not always created through effectiveness alone. Sometimes terror itself became a weapon. Ju-87 Stuka. Before you ever saw a Stuka, you heard it. As the aircraft dove toward its target, sirens mounted beneath its wings unleashed an inhuman scream across the battlefield. The sound alone caused panic. German engineers designed it intentionally. The Stuka was built just to destroy enemy positions. It was built to terrify entire populations before the bombs even landed. And during the early years of the war, it worked perfectly. Poland, France, the Low Countries, everywhere German blitzkrieg advanced, Stukas appeared overhead moments before devastation followed. They destroyed bridges, artillery, armored columns, and defensive strongpoints with terrifying precision. To soldiers on the ground, the scream of the Stuka became the sound of collapse itself. But the aircraft carried a fatal weakness. It was slow, extremely slow. Once Germany attacked Britain, the Stuka entered skies defended by Spitfires and Hurricanes. Suddenly, the terror weapon became prey. RAF fighters tore through entire formations in days. The same aircraft that dominated Europe now struggled simply to survive. The Stuka was devastating when nobody could stop it. Once someone could, its illusion vanished almost overnight. But while Germany relied on fear, Japan unleashed a fighter that genuinely seemed unbeatable. Mitsubishi Zero. When Allied pilots first encountered the Mitsubishi Zero, many thought the reports had to be exaggerated. A fighter with unbelievable range, impossible maneuverability, and enough firepower to shred enemy aircraft in seconds. But the reports were true. The Zero dominated the early Pacific War. It outturned almost everything it faced. Veteran Japanese pilots used it like a scalpel, striking with terrifying precision across China, the Philippines, Malaya, and the Pacific Islands. For months, Allied pilots entered combat at a massive disadvantage. Trying to dogfight a Zero became a death sentence, but the aircraft's greatest strength concealed its greatest flaw. To achieve that incredible agility, Japanese engineers stripped away armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks. The Zero was fast because it was fragile. Once American pilots adapted their tactics, refusing turning fights and using diving attacks instead, the balance slowly shifted, and as experienced Japanese pilots disappeared, replacements could replicate the same deadly skill. The aircraft that once ruled the Pacific eventually became vulnerable everywhere. By the end of the war, some Zeros were even being used in kamikaze attacks. A machine that began the war as a symbol of dominance ended it as a symbol of desperation. But while some fighters relied on elegance and maneuverability, another became famous for something much simpler: survival. P-40 Warhawk. Nobody called the P-40 Warhawk the most advanced fighter of World War II. It was the fastest. It was the prettiest. And it definitely was unbeatable. But it kept surviving. The P-40 was built like a hammer. Heavy, rugged, relentlessly dependable. Pilots brought back damaged Warhawks that should never have stayed airborne. And when the Flying Tigers began fighting Japanese aircraft over China, the P-40 earned its legend. Claire Chennault understood something many others did. The Warhawk could outturn a Zero. So he told his pilots never to try. Instead, they attacked from altitude, struck hard, and escaped before Japanese pilots could react. The results shocked the world. The P-40 was extraordinary because it dominated the skies. It was extraordinary because it adapted. And in war, adaptation keeps people alive. But then Germany introduced a fighter so dangerous it genuinely alarmed Allied commanders across Europe. WW190 and Spitfire. In 1941, British pilots encountered something deeply unsettling over occupied Europe. A German fighter faster in a dive, deadlier in firepower, and able to roll so quickly that escaping it became nearly impossible. The Focke-Wulf FW190 had arrived. For a time, it completely shocked the RAF. Some British pilots believed Germany had finally built a fighter superior to the Spitfire. But the Spitfire refused to disappear. Instead, it evolved. Faster engines, better weapons, higher performance. What followed became one of the greatest aerial rivalries in history. Two legendary aircraft, two nations fighting for control of the sky. And while Europe burned beneath them, America was preparing the aircraft that would change the war completely. P-51 Mustang. By 1943, American bombers were dying in horrifying numbers over Germany. Entire crews vanished before reaching their targets. The bombers needed protection. Then came the P-51 Mustang. Once fitted with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the aircraft became something extraordinary. Fast, long-range, and deadly at high altitude. For the first time, Allied fighters could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. And suddenly, German pilots were no longer hunting. They were being hunted. The arrival of the Mustang slowly broke the Luftwaffe's control of the skies. But even the Mustang looked old beside what Germany unleashed next. Me 2062. The Messerschmitt Me 262 did not look like a World War II aircraft. It looked like the future. The world's first operational jet fighter entered combat moving over 100 miles per hour faster than Allied fighters. Pilots who encountered it described pure shock. The Me 262 could appear, attack, and disappear before most enemy pilots could even react. But Germany introduced it too late. Production delays, fuel shortages, Allied bombing, and Hitler's interference crippled the program before it could truly change the war. Even so, the Me 2062 proved something terrifying. The age of propeller fighters was ending. The jet age had begun, and although Germany lost the war, this aircraft changed aviation forever.